Hello, Keith Rucker here at VintageMachinery.org. Guys, today I'm in for a real treat for you guys. I'm up in the Milwaukee, Wisconsin area, actually Oak Creek, just south of Milwaukee, and I've got with me a gentleman. This is Ron Grundy. I'm going to let him introduce himself in a minute, but he spent the bulk of his career working for Kearney Trecker, the guys that made milling machines just like this, who I'm a big fan of. I've got a K&T mill in my shop. I know many of you guys out there do too. But anyway, Ron, I got to meet him about a year ago. I actually bought my universal head from him. I found him advertising it, and I called him up on the phone, and we got to talking, and we hit it off with one another. He started telling me stories about K&T, and I came up here about a year ago, and I'm back up here again. I really wanted to get him on video to share with you guys some of the stories about Kearney Trecker. So, Ron, go ahead and introduce yourself and kind of kick it off there.
I'm Ron Grundy. Longtime employee of Kearney Trecker. I started at Kearney Trecker in 1963, and when Keith was up here the first time, I was telling him how I got my start at Kearney Trecker.
Yeah, this is a great story.
Was right out of the Navy, and when I went out there to apply for the position, they asked me, the HR guy asked me, well, do you know anything about scraping? And I thought to myself right away, boy, this guy never was in the Navy. Of course I know a lot about scraping. You know, I thought he meant scraping the paint off of the machines or something. So he said, well, I'm going to take you back in the shop and take a look at what we're doing here and see how you'd fit in. So when I went back there, I remember one of the fellows standing at a rotary table, and he was scraping the rotary table. And when I looked at it, I told the HR guy, well, that's not exactly what I did in the Navy, but I can catch on quick. So they thought they'd hire me. Okay, I'd get a job. You can start after the physical and stuff. You can start on Monday. So I started that following Monday, and they introduced me to one of the Serbian guys there that was a scraper, gave me a little square block like this, and a bucket of red lead and some black paint. We used black paint back in those days. We used a lamp black. They'd put a lamp black, and they showed me how to mix a lamp black and oil and make a little dauber out of a piece of blue jean cloth and rub it on the surface plate. And then I would work on the little square plate that they gave me and scrape on that. That was the first opportunity that I had to learn how to scrape. And they had hired another guy with me the same day, and we both were working on the plate, you know, and about 9:30 in the morning, 10 o'clock, whatever it was, he put his scraper down, put his red lead down, the rest of the stuff, and he said, this is not for me, and he walked out the door. I never saw him again. You know, but Rudy showed me how to scrape flat. And that was the first introduction I had, was to the flat scraping. And you worked on that for, I think, 3 or 4 days, scraping that little plate until he gave you the okay that there was enough surface bearing on there that you could actually start working on a piece of machinery. Wow. And the first thing they had me scraping was the tops of these knees, scraping the top of the knee flat on a S-series machine. This is a much older machine. But that's what I had been doing that's the first intro I had to scraping at Kearney Trecker.
Wow. So now your first job at K&T, you were basically just a scraper hand, I guess, working on putting together machines?
Well, we had, what they did in those days, you had classifications. You had a flat scraper, you were a flat scraper, then you advanced to Class C scraper when you got pretty good at doing that, then a B scraper, and then an A scraper assembler. So when you became an A scraper assembler, then you went up to the assembly floor, and we'd put the machines together as we'd scrape the machines, do all the geometries and stuff on the machines, you know, from the spindle, you know, doing the geometry on the machine, scraping it for flatness. Everything had to kind of go together, you know, so you'd build the whole machine.
So how many years did you work, I guess, in that stage, working out on the floor?
Well, I started out, I probably had about actually scraping every day 8 or 10 hours a day on Saturday. I probably did that for about 5 years, about the first 5 years. Then there was a slowdown, and I had worked my way up to an A scraper by then, okay? But there was a slowdown, so I was laid off for a number of months, and when I was recalled, they asked me if I'd like to go into the rebuild division, you know?
Okay.
So I thought, well, that'd be a good opportunity, because there you had a real opportunity to learn the whole, not only just scraping the machines, but disassembling, rebuilding, putting the whole machine together. You had your own machine. You do a complete rebuild all by yourself on one of these machines. So I went to the rebuild division after about 5 years.
And in the rebuild division, people would send y'all old machines to be rebuilt. Is that right?
Yeah, we would rebuild, do the complete rebuild job. I did that for 3 or 4 years. Then they made me the lead person. Then I wound up being the supervisor of our entire, mostly the knee types. I was a supervisor of the knee types, but I also did a lot of work on the CNC. At that time, we were building CNCs, and rebuilding CNCs.
Yeah.
So you went from the knee types, the CNCs, to all the different configurations and the machines that Kearney Trecker built. You know, so you really had a really good, if you wanted to call it an apprenticeship, on the whole spectrum from, you know, here to the latest and greatest, the big machines that we built, the Model 200s, 600s. They were rebuilding them by then.
Right.
So you had the Milwaukee-Matic EAs and EBs that we were rebuilding, and the 200s and 600s and 800s. They were starting to rebuild those. So that was pretty much what I did in the whole rebuilding spectrum. Okay?
Right. So in that rebuilding department, I guess, you know, my interest, and I think a lot of people that are viewing out here, you know, we're into rebuilding old machines and restoring old machines and so forth like that. But, you know, what kind of machines? I mean, you said mostly knee mills in the rebuilding, or did you see the whole gamut? What kind of age groups did you see coming in, even in the 60s and 70s, getting rebuilt? So a little bit about that.
About what?
Yeah, the types of machines and the age of the machines that were coming in to be rebuilt.
Oh, in the rebuild division, some of the machines come in that were, I think, probably the oldest that I can recall coming into our rebuild division. We had rotary head die millers from the 1930s, late 30s. And then this machine, we had a lot of machines like this from the wartime,
Right.
the 40s, early 40s, up until, and all the way through to maybe the 1950s, 60s, worth of twin feeds and stuff. We had that whole spectrum of machines that we rebuilt. So a lot of wartime machines in the 19, let's see, that would be probably about 1970, I'm talking 76, 77, in those years. A lot of wartime machines were rebuilt. They started to shy away from doing the little guys like this because the cost, it was getting non-cost effective to rebuild little 1H or 2H. A lot of the guys out there have those 2H machines. It cost us more to rebuild those machines than we could actually generate in revenue to rebuild them. You know, I mean, it was pretty not cost effective. So at the later years, we only took from number 3s up, and we did a lot of number 3, 4, 5, big number 6, like a 650 for the aircraft companies, and we were doing a lot of that stuff toward the end. And then when the CNCs started really taking over, these machines quietly just disappeared. They went off of the grid because customers, you couldn't afford to run these machines in production anymore. You know, you had to make a lot of parts quickly. You know. So
sure, absolutely. So, do you know, and you may not know this, I don't know, but do you know how, just as a reference, say in the late 1970s to rebuild like a 3H or a 2K or something like that, how much money did K&T charge to rebuild one? Do you know?
You were probably in the mid 70s. You know, I'm going to say a 2K or 3K was probably in the $25,000, $30,000. I don't really recall the cost, they weren't inexpensive.
It was expensive. Yeah.
And most of the machines came from Bendix Corporation, or you'd have General Electric or General Motors, or somebody that could afford, to send a Boeing aircraft. They could afford to.
Right.
They'd send a big number. I remember a big 650 came in from, I believe it was Boeing aircraft, and it was over $100,000 to rebuild it.
Wow.
So, you had to have deep pockets to send it to Kearney Trecker.
Yeah. Interesting. Now, changing the subject a little bit, but I remember too you telling me, this is before your time, but like during the war years, about the number of machines that K&T was kicking out.
Yeah, the guys would, you'd always talk to fellas that worked there during the war and stuff, and they would tell you about wartime production. The guys would say they'd come in 6 o'clock in the morning, and they were working piecework. And they would actually sit on their machine that they were going to do for that day, because they were working piecework, and they made they were talking about making up to 800 of these machines a month at Kearney and Trecker. Now, you got to remember, there was like 5,000 people at that time working there.
Wow.
And they built up to, the guys used to say they built up to 800. I don't know if they ever reached that number a month, but there was quite a number that they built, during the war. I mean, these machines were really being produced at a high rate during World War II. And then later on, and I told you about working in the parts department, I went from the rebuild division into the service area, where they'd send me out on these old machines and I'd work on them. And so I went from the service area to inside sales, where I would sell parts. And a lot of these machines, the old machines, I'd draw the lot cards out to look up part numbers and stuff. And out of all the wartime machines that I ever worked on and looked for parts and did different things, I went through all of the manifests and stuff that the machines were shipped with. I never found a mistake. In other words, these people were so conscientious when they built these machines during the war. When it said it had number 128, 212 shaft in there, the manifest said that, and that's what was in that machine. It was biblical. I used to say, this is what's in that machine, because people were so conscientious building those machines back in the day. That's why you still see them today, because this machine here, if I was to do a complete factory rebuild, you could run this thing the rest of your life.
You'd never wear it out.
It would never wear. I mean, this machine that we're looking at right here is 1940, and we can put a cutter in there today and go to work, and we can still run this machine. 1940. I don't know how many times it's been repaired or whatever, but it's still running. And it still could be going today. So. Yeah. That's a testament for American machine tools, not just Kearney and Trecker, but the whole gamut of American machine tools. And what really kind of upset me toward the end was, we never had much government support to save our American-made machine tools. Mm-hmm. The Japanese come in with cheaper, more cost-effective, and sort of put us out of business with what we had, but American machine tools, this was the Cadillac here.
It definitely was at that time, for sure, no doubt about it. So I think I also remember you telling me, and I don't remember the numbers, but I remember you telling me how long, when you first started in the 60s, from the time you placed an order, how long it would take you to get a machine from K&T.
Yeah, I remember in 1963, someone told me if you placed an order at that time, I think Kearney and Trecker had the percentage of milling machines sold in the world. We were right up there, like about 60%. We sold that many. And I think somebody said the lead time was like 2 years to get a machine.
Yeah.
And it gradually went down.
Oh, yeah. There. Yeah, I'm sure that it did over time. But it just seems, now if you call up and order something and they don't have it in stock right now, I mean, you're just all mad. But to get this kind of quality, it took time, and these machines were expensive. I mean, yeah, to buy one of these milling machines, I mean, pretty much at any time, it was probably, you know, some of the larger machines, it cost as much as buying a new house. Yeah, just for one machine. So, you know, it was always a big investment. Interesting. So you worked in the parts department toward the end, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And give us some stories from that time frame, or just, you know, kind of what you did.
Well, in the parts department, I went up into the parts department from the, I left supervision. I was fortunate enough to retain my job going out of supervision, because generally that doesn't happen. But I worked for Bob Trecker. He was in charge of our division, and he asked me to go over to the service area because they needed somebody over there that would work on the older machines. And so I went into the service area. I worked, you know, and I could work on the older machines. But what happened was we stopped servicing machines, you know, that were really in the 40s and early 50s. So everything was CNC. So anytime they needed me, I actually went from the service area up into parts sales, and I worked in parts sales. Customers would call for an old machine like this, and I'd kind of guide them through how to take the machine apart, replace the part, whatever they needed to do. I did a lot of that. And then maybe every 2 or 3 months I'd have to go out on a service call. An older machine was broken down someplace, so they'd send me out on a service call, that type of stuff. So I did that all the way till Kearney Trecker closed in 93. We closed in 93. So after we closed, I thought there would be a good opportunity to sell parts, you know, continue selling parts for these machines. So I scoured around and found companies that were going out of business, like Louis Alice. A lot of the parts that I have here today are from Louis Alice stockroom. They had a number of Kearney Trecker machines, and anytime you had a machine tool on the floor and the maintenance guy would say to the foreman, "Hey, this gear is broke. We need to buy one from Kearney Trecker." Well, he'd say, "Get 2 of them in case the next it breaks again." So they'd put one on the shelf, and after 10 years, nobody knew what they were. So, you know, I'd buy these stores, and I knew the parts, so I sold a lot of parts, and I continue doing this to this day,
Right.
And trying to sell some of these parts. And I also do, guys will call me up, "Hey, how do I take this apart? How do I take that apart?" I really enjoy doing that. I'll be 79 years old my next birthday, and I'm still working on this stuff, you know. And it's I really never did it for fun until I met Keith, you know. and then I thought, well, that might be fun, you know, just to work on one of these machines just for the heck of it, you know. I mean, I always in some form or fashion did it for a living, you know. But now, since I'm retired, and the last 10 years that I worked, I had taught school down at a technical college, so and I did this in between. So now I'm just kind of doing this and enjoying doing it, and I really enjoy talking to Keith and customers, or people that call me about their machines and how to, you know, fix them and so on. And how did you ever do on that gear that we were making for that Kearney Trecker head?
Yeah, so as you guys know, I got my universal head, and this is a gentleman that I got it from. He had the thing, he had it posted online, and I stumbled across and came up here. And we thought we had the right gear for it, but it turned out it wasn't the right gear. It was very close to the right gear, but wasn't quite the right gear. But about a month and a half ago, I had one of my viewers out west that had found a machinery dealer that was, I think,
you found one out in Oregon.
Oregon, yeah. So and he was fortunate enough that he went in there, and I sent, well, you had provided me with some blueprints, so I knew exactly what I was looking for, and I was able to give him the dimensions and look. And fortunately, he found that gear for me. I was going to make one. I was going to use my my lead attachment, everything to make one. But obviously, when I can find an original one that was properly heat treated and everything else, it's a no-brainer. I just went ahead and picked that up. Also, from the same place, I found the parking attachment that goes to my mill, and also got a sliding head. So, which I don't know that I'll ever need that thing, but it's really kind of I think for a 2K3H, there probably wasn't that many of those things made. They're probably a lot more common for the 2Hs, but
I don't ever recall overhauling or I've seen a few slotting heads.
Yeah.
You know, and I know that early when I started at Kearney Trecker, they were still making them. You know, the vertical head attachments they were still making and that type of stuff, but I don't remember I remember overhauling a few head attachments,
right?
But never a slotting. And I think I've seen one in operation.
Yeah.
Once, you know, how they operate. Yeah. But otherwise, they're pretty rare bird.
Yeah, I would think that they would be. So anyway, I was, like I said, I don't know that I'll ever need it, but I found one. The opportunity was there, and I'm like, I better grab it while I can, because if I don't, one day I'll regret it. So I went ahead and snatched it up. But and then I've been very fortunate. There was a few little odds and ends on that machine that I didn't have, and Ron dug around and found some parts for me, and nothing major. It was just, you know, handles and stuff like that, but he's helped me out. And, you know, if you guys have any parts you're needing for K&Ts, you know, he doesn't have everything, but you've got a pretty good supply in there.
I've got a pretty good, and you know, the one of the things that I've seen over the last few years is a lot of the small stuff is it's kind of gone from my shop, because hobby guys, you know, they're not going to, you're the only one that I know that's got really a larger machine, you know, a 2H, 3K, 3K. It's a pretty good size piece of iron to have for a hobby. These little guys, they're all over the place, and they're always looking for the drive gears for the vertical head attachments, because what happens to these, they get put under the bench, they get put away someplace, the machine gets sold, shipped out, they lose the gear, they've got the head, but they don't have the gear, you know. So that's one of the big things that guys are always calling me for those gears.
You know, there's no telling how many of those gears have been thrown away over the years because nobody knew what they were, you know, and they didn't realize that.
And I don't have any little ones gold. Anymore.
Well, very interesting.
But, you know, it was so interesting working at Kearney and Trecker. There was so many different, you know, avenues for advancement. You know, people worked there. There was all different things going on. When I worked in the service department, I went all the way to Cairo, Egypt for Kearney and Trecker. We sold machines all over the world at one time. Kearney and Trecker, I looked in the old lot books during the wartime, and we had machine dials and stuff that were, you know, in French, in Russian. You know, we sold the oldest machines. I remember going through some of the lot cards and looking, sold to the Tsar of Russia.
Wow.
You know, I mean, really all of this old, I mean, ancient stuff. They started in business in 1898, and Kearney and Trecker, the two guys, and the story is they worked for Kempsmith Mill. If you took a early Kearney and Trecker milling machine and stood it next to a Kempsmith,
there wasn't a lot of difference.
They'd be just the same, you know, because they went to old man Kempsmith, from what I understand, and asked to buy a machine because they wanted to open a machine shop. He wouldn't sell them one because he said, you guys will compete with me. So what did they do? They built their own. So that's where you have Kearney and Trecker, you know. And it was
about that?
Pretty interesting how the company started, and you know how they flourished all those years during the Depression. And the story is, during the Depression, old man Trecker, when they'd sell a machine during the Depression, he'd run out in the balcony and he'd ring a bell.
Wow.
You know, the guys knew we sold a machine.
Wow.
You know, because
that meant that they were going to be able to eat next week. Yeah.
Things were tough, you know. And I've got some old literature that shows some of the old stuff in the plants, you know, that they were building. And I actually worked in the second plant that they built in West Dallas. We called it the old plant. Renewment was in the old plant for a number of years. Then we moved out to Butler, you know, and they built the new plant in West Dallas in the early 50s. They built the high bays, and then right after that they built the low bays out there. And that factory was made for building machine tools. It was temperature controlled, climate controlled. Everything was, you know, set up, because when you built the newer type machines, the CNC machines, if you got hot or cold or hot, the geometries would change.
Right.
So it was a constant temperature all the time. And they did that like about 66, it was all temperature controlled. So they were really in the forefront of a lot of this stuff. You know?
Neat. Well, great. Well, listen, I appreciate you sharing
kind of
some
fun.
of your stories, reminiscing about the past, and it's really, really neat to hear, you know, some of the history of these great companies that made machineries that really helped build this country. And
I really would add that there was a ton of really talented people that worked at Kearney and Trecker. The engineers, I mean, some of the stuff they built, I had all I could do to put it together, you know, much less design and you know, go through this stuff. There was really some talented people with the Milwaukee Maddox and the things that they built. And people, you know, the machine tool industry today owes a lot to Kearney and Trecker, because they were on Kearney and Trecker's shoulders building this stuff, you know, from tool changers and automatic tool changers, the CNC tape controlled, the standalone machining centers. One of the first standalone machining centers, the Milwaukee Maddox EB, you know, like maybe 1967, 68, somewhere in that area. You know, the EAs, the EBs came in. Those were machines that were, you know, the beginning of what you have today. Yeah. You know, so Kearney and Trecker was there. This machine here too, you know, the original design, about 1935 is this original design. It went from 1935, you could still order it with a pulley in the back to run
off the line shaft.
Yeah. And then it went all the way up. And if you look at the machine, the SA that was built up into the, I think into the 70s or 80s by a Korean company. What was the name of that? They licensed a Korean company to build a little E-type SA. And it pretty much that same design for all those years. You know? So it was an amazing company to work for. I really enjoyed it.
Well, great. Well, again, I appreciate your time, and I hope my viewers out there enjoy getting to visit with you. And if somebody wants to get in touch with you, do you have like an email address or something that they can send requests?
My email address is rgrundy476. The 476 is for my old submarine that I was on. Oh. So it's rgrundy476@aol.com.
All right, I'll put that down in the video description as well. But he's glad to help people. Yeah.
I'm old and I look at my email once or twice every couple of weeks.
So be patient. Well, again, thank you very much. I appreciate you sharing with us. And anyway, this has been a treat for me, and I hope it's been for you as well, guys. So with that, we're going to sign off here. As always, guys, thanks for watching. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't already. Thumbs up, comments appreciated as always. And yeah, we'll catch you guys on the next video.
Okay, thank you, fellas.